Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, June 13th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Greg Stoker, former U.S. Army Ranger, host of the Colonial Outcast podcast, will be with us to talk about Israel's many strategic and military failures. And later in the show, Hayden Clarkin, also known as the Transit Guy, will join us to talk about Kathy Hochul's insane torpedoing of New York's congestion pricing plan. Also on the show, breaking news, and it's good news finally. The Supreme Court unanimously upholds mifepristone access, a sigh of relief for abortion advocates. Meanwhile, Southern Baptists, the U.S.'s largest denomination of Protestants, votes to condemn IVF yesterday. The U.S. claims Hamas has rejected the ceasefire Israel keeps rejecting. Sources tell NBC Hamas wants a firm timeline for Israeli troop withdrawal. Israel strikes yet another designated safe zone in southern Gaza, and the WHO issues dire warnings of famine. Again. The ACLU sues Biden over his asylum ban at the U.S.-Mexico border. Biden and Zelensky sign a 10-year security deal between the U.S. and Ukraine as the U.S. widens sanctions on Russia. Hillary Clinton endorses yet another primary opponent of Jamal Bowman's. AIPAC's very own George Latimer, she did that with Elliot Engel, did not work out so well, so let's hope that holds true. The Oklahoma Supreme Court dismisses a lawsuit brought by Tulsa race massacre survivors, likely the last opportunity for them to receive reparations. House Republicans vote to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. That'll go nowhere, because he didn't turn over audio from Biden's special counsel interview, the one Biden is, I don't know, pretty triggered about. I think it's not a big deal, but... A new AP poll finds over half of U.S. adults approve of Trump's felony conviction. Elon Musk is being sued for harassment by former SpaceX employees in the least surprising headline ever.
He's a recidivist on that front.
Oh, yeah. And lastly, police crack down on citizens in Argentina protesting Milei's extreme austerity and privatization bill that just passed the Senate. Very scary times in Argentina. We should be talking even more about that, honestly. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an Majority Report Thursday. I am joined now by Matt Leck and Bradley Alsop. And in the fun half, we've got Brandon Sutton. We've got Matt Binder. Hello, my friends.
Hello.
Hello. So let's get right into this breaking news here. The Supreme Court has unanimously rejected an attempt to ban mifepristone. That is great news for abortion advocates, for women's health advocates. Mifepristone, for people who are not familiar, is one of two drugs that are used in a medication abortion. It's mifepristone and mifepristol that are used together. Sorry, my allergies are out of control these days. Yeah. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, mifepristone, one of two drugs used in a medication abortion. Mifepristone and mifepristol are combined, and mifepristone is the one that basically blocks a hormone called progesterone, which is necessary for the pregnancy to continue, and then misoprostol contracts the uterus, and so the person who's pregnant expels the pregnancy in the form of a miscarriage. And you can actually use misoprostol, that second drug that expels the pregnancy, on its own. It's available over the counter in Mexico, and it's 80% effective on that front. But combined with mifepristone, it's extremely safe, extremely effective, widely used, the most common method in this country to end a pregnancy, which makes sense because an overwhelming majority of abortions happen in the first trimester. Around 90% of abortions happen within the first 12 weeks. And that's when the pills are used before, surgical abortions are necessary, particularly when complications rear their heads potentially later on in a pregnancy. It's so safe, but that didn't really prevent the plaintiffs here from making the case that it wasn't. But Kaiser Family Foundation found that when those two drugs are used together, it terminates a pregnancy successfully 99.6% of the time, and there's a 0.4% risk of major complications. The mortality rate is less than 0.001%. It is an extremely safe way to terminate a pregnancy.
These lawyers wouldn't use the umbrella of safety to, try to seek some other ends of, winding down women's right to, access to different types of healthcare, would they?
You would be wrong in your naivete there, Matt. No, that is exactly the argument that they used. But the Supreme Court was not buying the fact that these doctors who brought the suit had standing here. There were 11 anti-abortion doctors. One of them is a Republican state senator from Indiana who have a history of being anti-abortion. And their claim to the court was that they were materially harmed, that's what standing means, or harmed in some way, by having to prescribe this drug to their patients. And Brett Kavanaugh, who wrote and delivered the unanimous opinion here by the court, said that standing didn't pass the smell test. This was an excerpt that our friend Mark Joseph Stern found in the opinion this morning. Kavanaugh says here, consider some examples. EPA rolls back emission standards for power plants. Does a doctor have standing to sue because she may need to spend more time treating asthma patients? A local school district starts a middle school football league. Does a pediatrician have standing to challenge its constitutionality because she might need to spend more time treating concussions? A federal agency increases a speed limit from 65 to 80 miles per hour. Does an emergency room doctor have standing to sue because he may have to treat more car accident victims? The government repeals certain restrictions on guns. Does a surgeon have standing to sue because he might have to operate on more gunshot victims? That's the point here, right? If you're basically working in a field that is affected in some way by a federal law or a statute that may alter the way you do your job or cause you to do your job in a different way, and you may not like it, but does that mean that you are the party that is harmed by said law? Or are you just in a field that has to respond to the knock-on effects of said law? So that's what the court unanimously found. I mean, from Clarence Thomas to Alito to Kavanaugh here, who wrote this majority opinion. And if you're a little bit concerned by the fact that even these psychos like Alito and Thomas signed on to this, and you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, well, I do think that you are justified here, because the court was clear that this was a standing argument, as I keep repeating. The doctors had no right to bring this case. They were not harmed. It makes no sense. It opens a Pandora's box, as Kavanaugh was alluding to here. But the fight is not over, because what this signals is what Fox's Shannon Bream said, reacting to the breaking news and saying, this is probably not over.
Now, here's the twist to this. There are a number of states who tried to intervene in this case. They wanted to be parties to the case. The court did not allow that to happen. Those states have said if this case went the way that many of us thought it would, they don't get past the standing issue and don't get to the merits of the case. Those states say they are now standing by ready to file their own challenges to the way that the FDA has regulated mifepristone. So this case is over. The doctors didn't have standing. Access remains for the drug. But now watch for three of these states to say that they are going to now file their own legal challenges and try to prove they do have standing to actually get to the merits of how the case has been handled. The drug has been handled by the FDA.
Call that a boomerang case then, Shannon, because it could be coming back, all right? Stand by in case there's more coming up momentarily, Shannon.
So that is the point here, which means that the Republicans and the conservative activists on this front are not done. They have other states that are going to try to challenge this from a different perspective, maybe not from a doctor's harm perspective, but from, I don't know, maybe they'll be able to find somebody who was harmed in the process of getting an abortion, and that will be the way that they take it to the Supreme Court. As I mentioned, cases are incredibly rare. But Dave Weigel, also friend of the show, had this point this morning that I think is especially scary, where he was essentially saying this also allows for those challenges to come up in conjunction with Donald Trump getting elected, and he could appoint someone to lead the FDA as the FDA commissioner, that's a presidential appointment, who rescinds the approval of the drug. And the Supreme Court does not preclude that in the way that they ruled on this. So that is the roadmap going forward. And this is good news in the temporary, in the moment, right? But as I'm trying to reiterate, we will be back here at some point.
If I'm a political activist for the conservatives, I'm fine with having a little bit of, or not giving the anti-abortion movement a more sort of cause for excitement ahead of an election.
And that really could have been part of why Alito and Thomas, who vote for everything that conservative activists want, part of why they stood down here.
Yeah, fight another day.
We saw this in Arizona, too. I mean, they kept their secondary, more restrictive abortion law in place, but the 2 or 3 Senate Republicans in Arizona moved to the other side and rescinded the Civil War era pre-women's suffrage abortion ban that made it extremely restrictive. So they're cognizant there of the electoral implications for them. And do we think that the Supreme Court justices are above electoral concerns?
I certainly don't. And I also don't like him, actually, now that I think about it, mentioning the EPA like that. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Well, right. It's like an Escher painting, right? You look and you see new things. I'm not an art person. That's the right.
But it's also one of those
painting, right? Yeah.
But it's sure. But it's also one of those rhetorical devices of being like, hey, if we give you this, it could be used against us in a way that's not right. Like he's making a cogent point, but also in a way that's like self-serving to Republican interests in a Republican administration.
Yeah, and that's the fight that we will see in probably the coming months and years. Another reason why this election is so terrifying. All right, with that, folks, we are going to take a quick break. But just a reminder, this show relies on your support. We really appreciate the ability to be independent, to say what we think, to never be beholden to anybody else. And that's because of our members. The fact that, I said this on social media the other day, but Brianna Joy Gray just fired from the Hill because she was speaking critically of Israel.
Katie Halper, too, from that same organization.
Exactly. And Brianna, we publicly had some disagreements, right? But this is the kind of thing where, no, when you're on the left, you were principally against this. And so I just felt terribly that she got fired for speaking critically about a genocide. And that's what happens when you have kind of companies and media that's consolidated with a lot of money and corporate power. They'll represent the interests of the powerful. And so I'm grateful that we have an infrastructure here because of the members like you to keep us independent and to keep us from feeling, the guillotine over us, so to speak. So
yeah, I mean, especially the jointhemajorityreport.com because, YouTube's nice and it's been a big growth, since I've been at Majority Report, but I also don't trust that a little
could go
bit.
away,
They
right?
I mean, they change things all the time, and you can see it like, oh, in January of this year, they changed something with regards to ads, and it just like cut off, and we were doing very well before, and now it's just like, okay, and then what if they make another change, and it's like, okay, now we have an entire different economy we're dealing with, and thanks for joining the Majority Report, folks, because
Yes,
that's really it.
Join the majority.report.com.
And help us grow on Twitch too. We are close to, what is the landmark? 70,000 followers.
Oh,
so,
nice.
We're at 69, nice 508. So subscribe to us on Twitch.
All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we will be with Greg Stoker. We are back, and I'm thrilled to be joined now by Greg Stoker, former U.S. Army Ranger with a background in special operations and military intelligence. He is now an activist, political, and military analyst and host of the Colonial Outcast podcast, which I couldn't recommend more highly. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit more about your background. Why or where did you serve, for how long, and I guess how did you kind of come to an anti-colonial perspective, or a perspective that was critical of U.S. empire after your time in the Army?
All right. Well, I mean, it's not a unique story. I joined the United States Army to get the heck out of wherever I was, and it was the easiest way to do it. Paid for college, stuff like that. I was never like a huge gung-ho Captain America type, but I did go into the Ranger Regiment, which is a United States Special Operations unit, and I did 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan. Started off as kind of like an assault position. I was a fire team leader, and then I transitioned more into a human intelligence collection and analysis before I got out. And I think what I started really questioning what was going on when I got exposed to targeting kinetic strikes, i.e. drone strikes under the Obama administration. And there just really wasn't a standard of proof for who we were dropping in terms of kinetic strikes. If you're on the wrong contact list, it could be greenlit. As long as you didn't destroy infrastructure, it was good. You could be a baker who, had like 4th degree connections to like the Taliban or the Haqqani or proto-Islamic State. You were still going to potentially eat a missile. So that was problematic, and it didn't work. It was strategically stupid. And then I got out, started studying post-colonial studies and international relations, and it's been a 10-year journey to get to where I am right now. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, and that is part of what you bring to your analysis, particularly of what's happening in Gaza right now, that I really appreciate, because you talked about how under the Obama administration there really wasn't the scrutiny that should have been there in terms of who the targets really were and what their ties were to terrorist organizations. But I mean, the United States Army looks practically I guess, buttoned up compared to what we're seeing in Israel.
Yeah.
And what is that contrast like, even though you had those concerns as a part of the Army, and then it's on steroids with how Israel's handling Gaza?
I mean, I will never be an apologist for U.S. empire, but like, it's so bad we're looking, I wouldn't say good, but like, all right. So when it comes, apparently Israel is supposed to be fighting a counterinsurgency, right? And since we brought the U.S. Army, the U.S. military into it, U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine is kind of effective. It was more effective in Iraq than it was in Afghanistan. Afghanistan had a major foreign fighter problem. So fighters were coming in from like Pakistan and Iran and other parts. So complicating the situation. But it's called COIN, counterinsurgency doctrine. And one of the main pillars of counterinsurgency doctrine is if you're an occupying force, there's an acronym called SWEAT MSO. It's sewage, water, electricity, academics, trash, medical safety, and other. And it holds that if you're an occupation of a people and all of those sectors aren't up to code, and you cannot live in a modern standard of living, people are going to want to kill you. So if you're looking at it, so we would try to protect all these sites. Hospitals, I mean, Obama signed off on essentially bombing a hospital in 2015 in Kunduz province. But aside from that, we didn't have the state policy of bombing hospitals. And, we protect roads. So if we look at Gaza, they've destroyed the sewage pipes. A lot of the J dams, the 2,000 pound, bunker buster bombs have a unclassed penetration depth of 6 feet of concrete, which isn't going to collapse a tunnel, a hardened tunnel 50 feet underground, but it will collapse sewer, water pipes. Electricity, they hit power relay stations in October, so that's always been a problem. Academics, they've destroyed every college or university in Gaza. Trash, there is no trash. Everything's rubble. There's no civic infrastructure. Medical, there's like 1 to 2 trauma surgeons left in North Gaza. As a matter of state policy, they've gone and destroyed hospitals as much as they could while keeping their propaganda machine alive. Safety, there is no safety, and there's about to be a massive biological event anytime now. So they actually destroyed our own counterinsurgency doctrine that we advised them on because it is somewhat effective. But no, they're just they're not even pretending to fight a counterinsurgency. It's just straight up ethnic cleansing to make Gaza Strip unlivable. So.
Right. And so, I mean, as you describe that counterinsurgency doctrine that the United States adopted and supposed, Israel, I guess, for some time had been trying to follow to keep up appearances. But I mean, I don't know, I'm being overly generous there. Like, that is an explicit doctrine because it's in the interests of the party there, whether it be the United States Army or Israel, to basically control the way that they respond to something so that they can have some sort of victory. But when you abandon that and it's really just killing for the sake of it, that runs a fly, I would imagine, over some in, say, the United States intelligence community or in the military brass who are less ideologically genocidal and more interested in maintaining empire or power. We've noticed on this show how there's a difference in how, say, Lloyd Austin or Burns of the CIA talk, not that we hear too much from Burns, but approach Israel as it relates to how they've been handling Gaza versus how Blinken and Biden have stood so steadfastly behind Israel. Is that discrepancy kind of laid bare there?
Well, first of all, Lloyd Austin, it's kind of hard to gauge where he stands. He is a representative of the military. He will back the administration publicly, despite whatever he's saying behind the scenes. I mean, he does have a lot of problematic defense industry or military industrial complex affiliations, but it's hard to get a gauge on what military officials are believing unless you have a line on the inside. I know that there's a lot of discontent, but there's also a lot of groupthink within the military. Even if there's isolated pockets of outrage, everyone's going to toe the line. That's why we've only seen one major man from the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, resign instead of a whole onrush of people getting out, because people may disagree with it, but I remember being in that mindset. I wouldn't expect a lot of pushback or resistance. So in Burns, I mean, we know he's a diplomat. He's not really a spy master. He's trying to get this ceasefire deal done with parties that have both parties have positions that are unacceptable to the other. So.
Yeah, no, I am just fascinated, though, I guess, by the difference in terms of what is in the strategic interest of the United States versus versus Biden's kind of what he perceives as the right thing to do in terms of supporting Israel being this inherently moral thing, or what it means for his reelection bid. There's a bit of a gulf there. You mentioned the ceasefire proposal. let's talk a little bit about that. There's a lot right now in the press about back and forth about who has and who has not agreed to the ceasefire. We know that this basic framework of the ceasefire has been agreed to by Hamas for weeks, if not months. And they were in favor of the United Nations Security Council ceasefire that just passed. Israel was not. But we still then hear over and over from Blinken and other members of the White House that it's Hamas who is not agreeing to the ceasefire. Now, I think maybe that may have some more truth after the massacre for the hostage rescue, which we can get to in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But what do you make of that back and forth and how the United States is trying to present Hamas as the biggest obstacle to the ceasefire?
Well, of course they would. The one overriding goal is to provide political cover for Israel and to make them look as favorable as possible. I mean, before we get into the basics of the ceasefire, we have to acknowledge that from a strategic perspective, Hamas has achieved all of its objectives, putting the question of Palestinian self-determination and statehood back on the table, discrediting the deterrence capacity of the Israeli military and intelligence apparatus, which was destroyed on October 7th, and showing the world exactly what Israel was and getting the conversation about Palestine foremost in the global forum. So they've achieved all their strategic objectives, and Israel has achieved none of itself. None of it. First of all, it's going into pariah statehood. It's acting increasingly like a rogue state. They haven't freed all the hostages, which was one of their stated objectives. Destroying Hamas and dismantling Hamas completely was one of their stated objectives, which is impossible. They would literally have to kill everybody in Gaza, and genocidal regimes don't last, so they can't do that. And so they're in an impossible position. What they're trying to do is, you remember during the Iraq War, President Bush flew in on the fighter jet, and there was the mission accomplished on the Eisenhower aircraft carrier. That is essentially what they're trying to do. They're trying to polish this massive foreign policy nightmare / turd to make it look like something that it's not, like an Israeli victory. Like, we've dismantled Hamas so much that October 7th can never happen again. Well, yeah,
and that's what the U.S. is doing too, right,
yeah.
Greg? In the sense that that's why they're trying to present it as if it's Hamas, the Israel will end up having a victory because they get Hamas to agree to a ceasefire, even if it's not true at all.
Yeah, and so now they're trying to reframe this whole thing as Israel has degraded Hamas so much they're no longer a military threat, and now they're willing, now that they've achieved their pseudo objectives, which were never their objectives, they're now being gracious and presenting Hamas with this. But the thing is, Hamas doesn't need to accept it because they can keep fighting. According to Israeli intelligence veterans and like Mariv, Ynet News, their own intelligence officers say that they couldn't defeat Hamas before 2026. And personally, I believe that to be completely optimistic.
Right. Well, Hamas is recruiting, we know, right? And there are some insurgent Hamas fighters, I guess, in the north who have been giving Israel some grief. And so the hostage rescue operation, how did that play into the ceasefire talks? Because from Israel's perspective, that's Netanyahu and the far right getting to say, see, we need to continue this war, genocide, war, to release the rest of the hostages, when we know, though, the overwhelming number of hostages that were released were during the temporary ceasefire. They only rescued 4 in this instance and killed over 270 Palestinians. Now, there have been rumblings that the United States may have provided intelligence support for this operation.
Oh, we did.
Oh, we did. Okay. Yeah. So we provided intelligence support for an operation that saved 4 hostages and killed over 270 Palestinians as we're trying to get this ceasefire over the hump. Do you think that affected Hamas's position here? Because they probably are like, you guys are not honest brokers here. You just okayed this operation that was a slaughter.
Right. So no, it doesn't really affect Hamas's position at all, because even though Israel did this hostage rescue massacre, they got 4 hostages back. They potentially killed 3 other hostages in the hostage rescue operation, but I haven't been able to verify that. I don't think anyone has, but that's definitely a possibility. So they got the hostages back. Okay, so what's going to happen now? Hamas is going to change their tactics, techniques, and procedures around the hostages. They're going to go back into the tunnels, and no more hostages will be recovered through military action. So that's done.
Because they were in civilian homes, right, when they were rescued. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so they're not going to allow that to happen again. So basically, the only way to get the hostages back now, which is a major political pressure point, both internally and externally for the Netanyahu's administration, is going to be through diplomacy. That's the only way it's going to happen. So Hamas has shifted tactics from, doing more direct action combat operations to more booby trap IED warfare. So, which is more sustainable in a long-term a war of attrition, because they're not going to lose as many guys doing direct confrontations against tanks. So we dealt with that in Kandahar and Afghanistan, and you may get like 1-2 guys in an operation if you're lucky, but no, they're just going to have a lot less combat attrition now and be able to keep fighting for an extended period of time. Whereas the starvation and the immense suffering of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza will continue to mount and build pressure. So yes, the United States is trying to frame this as like all Hamas has to do is accept it, but they won't, because they don't have to, because they're in a strategically powerful position right now. And they may be degraded militarily, but they're still politically potent. And they won't agree to this current iteration of the ceasefire deal because it's not, the language is so vague on how Israel will be bound. And I think within the UN Security Council, there's two types. There's a non-binding and a binding resolution, and it's not binding on Israel. There's no coercive measures in place to force Israel to adhere to any of the action items in the ceasefire. And so why? And it's too vague. This is why Russia abstained, because they wouldn't agree to it, because they said, quote, the language is too vague. So the ceasefire is not going to happen at this iteration of the deal.
And that's also because it's so vague that it doesn't provide a timeline for Israeli troop withdrawal and making. I mean, it creates wiggle room essentially for Israel to go back into Gaza if they provide some sort of pretense for it, is my understanding.
Yes, one of the main points is they'll kind of withdraw outside of the population centers and stay on the periphery, but of course be able to respond anytime they choose to. And they'll also be able to limit freedom of movement because from different sections of Gaza.
Yeah. So in terms of Gaza, they are losing their internationally, but also we know that Hamas has been fighting back against them at least a little bit. In parts of Gaza. Now, in the north, you have Hezbollah, and Netanyahu's government has signaled multiple times a desire to expand this war into the north against Hezbollah, into Lebanon, so that if they get out of the hornet's nest that is Gaza, right, where they are forced to withdraw because of the dire humanitarian situation and international pressure, how else can Netanyahu continue to remain in power? Well, maybe he can fight Hezbollah in the north. What is the status of that?
Okay, well, first of all, this ongoing narrative about taking the fight to Hezbollah and defeating Hezbollah is completely absurd, which I'll get to in a minute. But since October 7th, one of the things prior to October 7th, one of the things that's always kept Israel kind of safe from a military perspective is what we would call its deterrence capacity. The belief in it being the scariest military in the region, having the Mossad be this all-seeing, all-knowing, omniscient force, intelligence force. But the thing is about October 7th, it shattered Israel's deterrence capacity. We're hearing reports that Apache pilots were targeting Hamas militants in the Gaza envelope, not with military intelligence architecture, but from like WhatsApp groups with civilians. So it was incredibly embarrassing. In order to get it back, they have to defeat Hamas, which they can't do. It's just not possible. There's a whole new generation of fighters because they've created a whole new exciting acronym, WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. So I'm sure those kids are just going to let bygones be bygones.
Right.
But if they can't defeat Hamas, they can't defeat Hezbollah because Hezbollah is the most powerful non-state military actor in the world. They're orders of magnitude above Hamas in terms of like discipline, manpower, weapons, and equipment, because they don't have to operate in an open-air prison camp. They can. Not only that, it's that before this point, a lot of the Hamas fighters didn't have any combat experience. Well, Hezbollah's been fighting the Islamic State in Syria for a while now. So they've been doing what is now a low intensity campaign over there. And so they are also professional soldiers, right? That's all they do. The 50,000 reservists that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant want to send to the front to confront Hezbollah, they do what, 2 years work in the tech sector, and they're getting recalled to go fight against a professional military that has honeycombed all of its military assets in a tunnel system way more complex and fortified than the Hamas tunnels in Gaza. I mean, it's just insane. And plus, they already lost to Hezbollah in 2006. They were defeated before Hezbollah was as powerful as they are now. And what the war in Gaza has showed us is that Israel, when we look at the operational autopsies conducted by war colleges in the United States, like out of Fort Leavenworth and stuff, the IDF has literally not updated their military or tactics at all. So there's no point that this campaign can succeed. All Israel will do is bomb Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, put pressure on civilians to try to pressure Hezbollah. But it didn't work in 2006. It didn't work in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge, and it's not working in Gaza because collectively punishing civilians doesn't affect military operations when it comes to asymmetrical warfare. It never has. There's no historical precedent for it. So even if you're like, why doesn't Hezbollah just care about the civilians? It's like, okay, well, that's not what we're talking about. From a strictly analytical point of view, it won't affect Hezbollah at all. But that's the core doctrine of the Israeli military. It's to punish civilians, to pressure militants.
And then, in terms of Hezbollah also getting emboldened, what are the possibilities of other states seeing funding Hezbollah and potentially their attacks on the IDF as a way to weaken the United States' standing in the region, and particularly its soft power as it relates to diplomacy in the Middle East and beyond?
Well, I mean, look, American soft power has been hit not just with this war in Gaza, but also the debacle in Ukraine. So, yeah, this does challenge American soft power. But I do want to talk about American escalation within the region, especially in Iran, despite like defense, like war hawks such as Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley, who basically just say, are wind-up toys saying, bomb Iran, hit them hard. The establishment actually doesn't want that. If we look at the drama that's played out between the United States and Iran since the beginning of this year, everything points to the U.S. State Department and Department of Defense not wanting to escalate. So a few American soldiers were killed on an air base in Jordan, and so how do we respond? By waiting 5 days, telegraphing to Iran that we were going to strike IRGC targets in the Levant. It was like, hey, Iran, we're going to bomb you. Watch out. You can't hurt Americans. And then we conducted 85 strikes, hitting mostly empty warehouses. And then after Israel destroyed the consulate in Damascus, what did the U.S. say? We will not get involved in a regional war. So we helped them defensively take down some of the Iranian ICBM or medium-range ballistic missile interceptions, but that's it. And then Lloyd Austin said yesterday, apparently according to water cooler talk, that the United States is not interested in an escalation in Lebanon because we don't have the staying power. First of all, the complications in Russia, and now a potential flashpoint in Taiwan. A lot of people within the command echelon in the United States are saying, like, we don't want to go back and get involved in another forever war in the Middle East. We have other strategic interests that are going to test our staying power as it is.
And the Biden administration wants to pivot to Asia. I mean, and they have for a while. That was part of, I believe, the reasoning behind the Afghanistan withdrawal. But it makes this policy towards Israel so anachronistic, except when you take into account Biden's ideological Zionism. Now, can you mentioned there a little bit about how it became extremely obvious that the United States is uninterested in backing a wider war, whether it be with Lebanon or, I mean, even with Iran, for example. To Israel's deterrence, you touched on this a little bit before, but these 9 months and also the signal that the United States won't back them if they choose to go after other actors in the region, does that signal a shift in the collapse of kind of Israel's presentation of itself as a mighty military power in the Middle East?
I mean, again, I don't see how they reestablish their deterrence capacity, because they can't defeat either of their two main adversaries in which they're engaged in combat operations with. And while they're trying to reassert their deterrence capacity, they just did a targeted assassination. It was apparently it was a bomber strike on Sami Abdullah, which was like essentially a brigadier general in Hezbollah, which is a significant target, but it's not going to significantly degrade their operations. So if I was just reading Jerusalem Post today and Times of Israel, and they're doing a lot of COPE articles about how, like, now that they've taken out a senior Hezbollah official, Nasrallah is scared that he's next, and so they won't escalate. It's like, well, Hezbollah, even though you've killed one of their senior commanders, they are not going to escalate and open up a front. Iran doesn't want it. They don't want it. Hezbollah is a political entity that has a reputation for pretty good governance, and they know that if a front opens up, the people that they're responsible for in southern Lebanon are going to get hit hard. So that's their first responsibility, and so they're conducting escalation management on the northern border. So maintaining military pressure, taking out military sites, because they've confined their operations to military targets like sensor relays, intelligence outposts, Iron Dome batteries. They just took one out. It's $100 million of our tax dollars down the drain because we're going to have to replace it. Awesome. And then and Israel has incrementally retreated from the north, creating this no man's land buffer zone between the north and south Lebanon. And so, yeah, Hezbollah is probably just going to keep doing that. They're not going to escalate this. I think they've proven that, because this is not the first time that the IDF has taken out a Hezbollah official. So I don't think their stance is going to change at all, because what they're doing is effective. It's incredibly effective, and they don't need to have Beirut get bombed to achieve their strategic goals and their operational goals. The only one who's going to escalate this is Israel. I personally hope they don't. I keep saying I don't think they will, but they're becoming more and more a rogue actor.
Yeah. I mean, I hope they don't for everybody's sake, but we have no reason to believe that they won't. Their behavior, I think, we've played this clip by Israeli historian Ilan Pape saying that this is the beginning of the end of Zionism, but that Zionism will the end will be extremely bloody, and the tunnel is quite long to getting to that point. Do you see that from a military standpoint, based on what you've said about their deterrence and how they've lost so much recently?
I mean, they can continue to keep bombing things and, wasting artillery shells on rubble, but there's a global supply chain shortage in RDX and HMX, and we're already using our own stockpiles for wartime deterrence and contingency operations to support Israel. So there are it might seem, just because we're this massive empire that can build a bunch of bombs, there are still realities. It's not limitless. So they have a munition shortage, not just in offensive weapons, but in defensive missile intercepts for the Iron Dome. So I don't see how they can. This party can't last forever. Plus, we're still trying to support Ukraine, and that front demands so many munitions. Sometimes they shoot 10,000 howitzer shells a day. So what this is really doing is testing United States staying power, and we're losing a lot of soft power, because it seems like the only way that the United States does business and deals with problems is to sell more guns, weapons, and ammunition. But everybody who's in the know knows that there's just a shortage of literally RDX explosive materials. So that's another thing people aren't taking into account. So we can't keep sending weapons.
Well, that brings me really to my last question for you, Greg, which is that the diplomacy that is being done is, in my view, disastrous as it relates to the Abraham Accords, because the United States is continuing a Trump administration policy to push through normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and offering like a defense treaty with Saudi Arabia, which also could potentially mean, according to some reports, that Saudi Arabia could be allowed to develop its own nuclear weapon, but even if not, could be some arms deals for Saudi Arabia. What's your view of the Abraham Accords and why the administration is pushing so hard for this, even though clearly it seems like it's I almost wish casting more than anything?
Well, I think people in the administration are starting to notice what Saudi Arabia is doing, and they're concerned about losing our greatest strategic ally, or at least having our greatest strategic ally play both sides of the field. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, just I think a few weeks ago, publicly accepted an invitation to Tehran, for the first time in like 20 years. Right. I think they're starting to put in plans, if they haven't already, to start like selling oil in the yuan. So, the monopolization of the Gulf states is something that we are losing. And what I say is we, I mean, the American administration and foreign policy apparatus. I don't want to say we because I don't agree with it, but yeah, there's definitely a noticeable shift towards a multipolar as opposed to a Western unipolar world order right now. And yes, we could give Saudi Arabia nukes, but will that change their massive strategic interests? Like, I think more cooperation with BRICS and other players, and the de-dollarization, the push towards eventual de-dollarization is a potent deciding force within their own policy.
Well, Greg, I really appreciate your time today. Couldn't recommend Colonial Outcast enough. We'll put a link to your podcast and your socials and stuff in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be with Hayden Clarkin talking about congestion pricing in New York. We are back, and we are joined now by Hayden Clarkin, also known as the Transit Guy on social media. He is a transit advocate who studied civil engineering at the University of Connecticut, also works in the transportation industry. Hayden, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Huge fan. So thank you.
Well, huge fan of your Twitter account as well. For anybody who wants to start to get radicalized about transit policy and how insane the United States has been in making everything catered to the car, Hayden's account is a great place to start. And never has that obsession with, I guess, maintaining our infrastructure surrounding the car been more obvious than the news from last week that continues into this week. New York Governor Kathy Hochul torpedoed congestion pricing, which was a plan in New York that had been laid out and had been taken into account for years at this point. We were making policy choices in this city based on the presumption that congestion pricing was taking effect. Just take us through the past week or so and what's happened in New York.
Sure. So I don't really even know where to start, because this has just been the worst political move, I think, in New York state history. And I think that's saying a lot. So this has been something that congestion pricing has been something that the United States has been trying to do since 2007. under the Bush administration. After like multiple failed attempts, we get to the transit crisis of the New York City subway in 2017. Everyone kind of remembers there was literally a state of emergency declared by Governor Cuomo at the time due to how bad the deferred maintenance on the subway system was. And so the plan was, we have such a huge backlog of things to do, we need to do congestion pricing. This has been too long and we need the money. And so basically in 2019, the state mandated by putting it in the budget, MTA, we're giving you authority. You need to raise $1 billion a year, starting in whenever you approve of it, to make money for the capital plan and for capital improvements. And so that looks like $1 billion a year, which the bond that they would take out, which would have been $15 billion, would have been used to pay for. And so that's kind of where we're at. So in 2023, the US DOT finally gave all the final approvals. They were like, go at it, fam. You got this. We believe in you. Unfortunately, about 1 million lawsuits came, particularly from Governor Murphy, Rep. Gottheimer, who we all have our own opinions about, of you cannot do this. This will hurt New Jersey residents a lot to charge $15 to go into Manhattan, the densest and most transit-rich place on the continent. So take that for what you will. Governor Hochul really was holding out for a very long time, up until December, where she had a whole rally around it. And then 2.5 weeks ago, when she was in Sweden and said, we cannot wait to do congestion pricing in New York City. And then on June 5th, we got an about face. And now with 2 days left in the session, which on June 5th was 2 days left in the session, she decided, we'll figure out another way to get the $1 billion. And everyone was like, what? Excuse me? Yeah. After spending $590 million on all of the equipment and the tolling, it's already set up, already ready for June 30th. So 25 days before, after literally years and years and years and years of planning and 28,000 environmental documents, we are where we are.
So that, I mean, first of all, I will editorialize and say we have remarked on this program that she may be one of the dumbest Democratic politicians of all time. And it's up there, because this was insane to do this within weeks of this literally taking effect. And as you say, the infrastructure being put in place and paid for, and budgets being created around the presumption that we would have this influx of money coming in from congestion pricing, $1 billion a year or more, to help pay for billions of dollars in subway, bus, other transit repairs and improvements, which is desperately needed in the city that doesn't have a lot of handicap access, has a lot of delays, many other issues with the New York City transit system. But her claim was that this would affect regular New Yorkers or regular people commuting into New York from New Jersey, from Connecticut, from Westchester County, whatever. What can you explain why that claim isn't necessarily true? Because it seems as if the income for people who drive into the city already is fairly high compared to those who take transit.
Absolutely. So I want to say, I don't know if this was a decision Kathy Hochul made on her own. I do think it was congressional delegation thinking about
Hakeem Jeffries, for sure, apparently was worried about suburban voters.
Absolutely. And so when you think of, I did the math based on the report, we're talking about 50,000 commuters within the areas that are currently competitive of all of the New Jersey and New York collar congressional districts. About 50,000 people would be subject to paying that within all of those districts in total. So, I mean, if you take $1 billion a year and you divide it by 50,000 people, I think you just can pay them to stay home at that point. So yeah, the idea that a ton of working class people are just driving into lower Manhattan has just been patently false. There has been, as I said before, 28,000 pages of environmental studies and reviews to show that that is in fact not the case. And of the 900,000 vehicles that come into Manhattan every single day, 170,000 people would be subject to that tax, which is about 1.5% of all commuters that go into New York City, all 5 boroughs. So it is a small, minute group of people. Now you might say, well, what about people who, might have a disability or a low income? There are exemptions for people who are of low income. If you make $60,000 or less a year, you would not be subject to the fee, as well as if you had a disability or you were or you were a vehicle that transported people with disabilities to medical appointments or whatnot, you also would not be subject to this. Take the train. I don't really know what to say to people. I mean, take the train. And for Phil Murphy and Josh Gottheimer to sit there and watch New Jersey Transit literally decay and face a $1 billion shortfall as he goes around and puts a $10 billion highway widening plan through that nobody wants. I don't see how the lack of transit that you have is an excuse when you are the governor. Then fix it. Right. If you think the transit is so bad that people cannot get out of their cars, then fix it. It's an indictment on yourself.
Let's pull up this graph here just to continue to illustrate this point. New York Focus does great work, and they have these 2 graphs that illustrate how big how significant the problem is in lower Manhattan and Midtown. So it's 60th and lower, excluding the West Side Highway and the FDR, which are the 2 major highways that go across the coast of lower Manhattan for people who are not in the city. So
just to be clear, those people are exempt from paying. If
exactly.
You on West Side Highway or FDR, you are exempt from paying unless you enter the zone. So
the middle of the island where it's
like into a local street, correct? But
exactly.
You can literally loop around all day and you would not be charged.
And it's 60th and lower for downtown, which includes Times Square. It includes much of Midtown Manhattan. It includes a lot of tourist destinations. Madison Square Garden, right? Ooh. So this is a graph of Manhattan traffic speeds. Mm-hmm. So you see here how they have sunk. It is sunk to a new low, and that one of the lines there is the Central Business District. And the Midtown, which is really primarily, I think, the focus of congestion pricing, you can see how that's around 5 miles or less than 5 miles an hour. Yeah. About 5 miles an hour. So the article says that average taxi speed last month was 6.6 miles per hour in the Central Business District, where the program would have applied. But when you look at just Midtown, which is really, again, the biggest problem here, it actually is 4.5 miles an hour, barely faster than a brisk walk, is what New York Focus talks about. So it is so congested there, and it's also contributing to air pollution, which lowers people's standards of living, that you would move around faster in Midtown Manhattan walking than you would in a car, because there are so many dang cars in that area of the city.
Absolutely. There are a few million people every day who take the New York City bus system, the MTA bus system, and they're subject to average speeds in these buses between 5 miles per hour and about 9 miles per hour, depending on the line. And you're moving how many people? And when you say, well, transit's not good enough, that's why I have to drive, it's a cyclical argument, right? Buses are slow, and therefore you drive, and then you are in front of a bus, which is slow, which then makes other people not want to take the bus, and therefore drive, making the bus slow again. So it's this cyclical argument, and it's just not one that really holds water. And I don't think that, arguably, I'm sure I could be corrected, but I can't imagine one of the biggest economic generators in the country having speeds of 4.5 miles per hour is good for the economy. And there is a hidden cost to congestion in general that we never talk about.
Yeah, this same article talks about how it's cost billions of dollars even if you just care about the money flowing into the economy, those delays have cost money for the city and for people affected by it. And then you also see here in the second graph that deaths from traffic-related incidents in Manhattan are continuing to hold, and it took a slight dip in 2020 because of the pandemic, but it holds at a rate that's fairly high. Last year it was 28 people killed in crashes in Manhattan, but the injury rate is even more substantial, 6,000 people injured due to traffic rates. I saw people clowning on Kathy Hochul, who was talking about how watch out for shark attacks when you're going to Montauk or whatever, but not necessarily worried about the traffic deaths and injuries that result from so many cars being packed into such a tiny island in the urban area.
Yeah, we're saying this the morning or the afternoon after an 88-year-old woman was killed walking across the street in Brooklyn yesterday. So this is something insanely real that we're not talking about. Pedestrian deaths have been the highest they've ever been since, I think, the 80s. This is not getting better, especially with cars being bigger. I would rather get hit by a Prius than a Dodge Ram. And as cars and SUVs get bigger, this is kind of the issue that we're dealing with. One thing I will say is that she's also been getting a lot of flack for saying that she goes to diners and she learned about congestion pricing being bad from her time in the diner. And she used a diner that is literally in Grand Central Station, which is the largest train station in the world, to say that people from New Jersey, a state known for diners with 500 diners, that New Jersey residents would not go and drive into 42nd Street and find parking, I guess, around Grand Central to go to this one diner. And therefore, that's why $15 billion of capital funding should be rejected.
Okay, so I will say this, and I grew up in New Jersey, Diner Central, love it about New Jersey. New York City used to have more diners. They don't really have them as many anymore, in part because it's just too expensive to run a diner and with the real estate that's available to people in the city. So it's both antiquated and dumb and makes no sense. And just the politics of this, apparently her office was shocked by the backlash, but it was so... Brad Lander, who is the city comptroller, has announced that they're potentially going to sue Hochul's office over this because of, again, all that went into the planning that was happening in the city surrounding this funding mechanism.
Absolutely. So the MTA is actually in the law in 2019 was compelled to do the congestion pricing. So when the governor revoked that was not actually an official edict that could stop the MTA. So the MTA could still today on June 30th turn on the gantries. It was more of like, is the MTA going to go to war with Kathy Hochul? And I think they've chosen not to do that, it sounds like. But yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense given that they have the authority currently on the books to do so. And one thing also that we haven't talked about, and I know you brought up accessibility, there are 472 stations in the New York City subway system. It is a massive system. I think it's number 3 in the world for number of stations. 69% do not have elevators. So the money that would have gone to this capital plan would have actually added 70 elevators as part of this massive plethora of capital spending. It would have gone to 70 elevators that are located in all 5 boroughs. And that's not happening anymore. Or at least it's been deprioritized, as MTA has kind of said in the last couple of days. But the really big problem here is that the MTA was sued for not having ADA accessible stations after the ADA Act passed under the first Bush administration. And so they are being compelled to, by 2055, all stations have to be accessible. And now if we're talking about that, we're talking about if you literally were born the day that it was signed into law, you would be 65 by the time the MTA subway system was fully accessible. And this throws a massive wrench into that because now we are pausing all of this elevator work until we can figure out what is going on.
I mean, that lawsuit sounds like it has a lot of merit. You're not allowed to. That was one of the more successful, honestly, regulatory moves that the federal government has ever made, which is to make every place handy accessible. It's just not the case in New York City whatsoever. And as you say, a majority of the stations, 69% don't have elevators. That's
Correct.
A violation of the federal statute.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what we're now adding into the mix. And also Second Avenue subway, which is supposed to move 150,000 people a day once open, is completely told to stop work. Because one of the things that we didn't realize, or people don't realize, is that when the federal government comes in and says, hey, for Second Avenue subway, we're going to give you $3-point-something billion, that's a match to the state's funding. And so when the state does not have that funding anymore, the federal monies that were earmarked to it are now in flux and are not kept. And so now we have to figure out are we have to going through this whole funding process again to fund something that we've already started working on? This is the Kathy Hochul transportation plan right now that we're seeing. And one thing she said was in her speech, which was a crazy about face, was this will hurt small businesses. And her proposal was to add a payroll tax in lieu of a usage tax for cars.
That was going to be my next question. Can you explain that? Because
I can't.
So a payroll tax is a tax on people making wages, and not everybody, right? But I don't know how they would structure it, but it's lower to middle to maybe even middle upper income people, where it's a tax on their paycheck to pay for this. But Correct. It also, if you were to just say, okay, that's the funding mechanism now, we'll tax New Yorkers more. That money was also supposed to go out to train lines in the suburbs to help improve them as well. Correct. So that's money getting taken out of the pockets of regular New Yorkers to help the suburbs double.
10% of the congestion pricing in the law is that it has to help Metro North, which serves Connecticut and upstate New York, as well as Long Island Railroad, which serves Long Island. And so with her idea, New Yorkers would get taxed to then pay for the suburban transit systems and train systems of people who would not, or of drivers who would come in, still not have to pay anything. And we would have to pay their improvements for them.
Right. And while also not disincentivizing them from coming into the city via car, which is also harmful for our environment, which should not get lost in this discussion, this is also has been endorsed by environmentalists, as you say. And it's, as we kind of wrap up here, Hayden, congestion pricing has happened in other cities in the world. This would have been the first of its kind in the United States. But this is not like New York is making this out of whole cloth. I know London has congestion pricing, and it's taken effect, and it's had some good results. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You were bringing up pedestrian and traffic deaths. Traffic deaths since 2019 in London have gone down 40% since it was implemented. Traffic's gone down. And one thing in the last London elections, I think it happened, I want to say maybe 2 months ago, there were London elections for the mayoral race. And Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of London, who is a major champion for congestion pricing, this was a referendum on, do we still want to have congestion pricing, because this man wants to expand it. And the places in which he wanted to expand it were the biggest swings towards him in this race. People see how good it is. And I understand it's not popular to think oh, I'm going to get taxed to live my day-to-day life. But once it's actually implemented, these plans have been super popular. And it's just one of those things where it's really sad, because San Francisco's been thinking about it, and other cities have been thinking about it as a way to make their transit better. And if New York City's not going to do it, it really spells doom for the rest of all of the cities who might potentially want to do it. If it's not good for New York City, then it's not good for anywhere. And so that's kind of what Kathy Hochul is doing. And also one last thing is the political idea, or the political thought to then 3 days after canceling congestion pricing, go to a car dealer fundraiser for yourself that was
a little on the nose.
Dealer association at $5,000 to $10,000 a head. The math ain't mathing. Like, just you need to fire your team and like rehire better advisors, because that is a crazy optics.
Yeah, it's a little much, Kathy. Just tone it down slightly. Well, Hayden, really appreciate your time today, and thanks for that wonderful explainer about this. Hayden Clarkin, the transit guy. You can follow him on Twitter. Where else can people find your work, Hayden?
I'm on Threads and Instagram, the transit guy, and then on Twitter, the _transit_ guy. Elon will not give me that. Will not let me remove those underscores.
Oh, all right. Well, appreciate you. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, Hayden, and talk to you soon. Thanks so much. Okay, with that, we're going to wrap up the first part of this program, the free part of this program. Head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. We will take your calls, read your IMs. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Ben Fong on, talk about the Oddfellows. We also talked about AOC a little bit and some outreach to Zionists about hate, which is not what I would do. And we talked a little bit about what happened in labor after Jeremy Corbyn took over. So check that out if you want. David and I discussing that. People gave it high marks. And so, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We also talk about what Jimmy Dore fans are doing these days.
Oh my God.
Which is stalking Jill Stein and for not going on the Jimmy Dore show.
Ever increasingly niche. That they just keep narrowing that audience. On ESPN, we talked a little bit about both the championship series, and our analysis for the Celtics and Mavs still holds now that the Celtics are up 3-0. We talked about the Panthers against the Oilers, also still holds because the Panthers are up 2-0. And then we did a pretty deep dive into the WNBA and media figures' reaction to Caitlin Clark being left off the Olympic team, and why it's ridiculous. YouTube.com/ESPN show. And we have Brandon Sutton, like magic.
Hello.
Like
magic.
How are you, Brandon, and what's happening on the discourse?
I'm doing well, Emma. On the discourse this week, we'll be talking about Hunter Biden's conviction, Trump's hunt for his VP, and the upcoming presidential debates.
There's some double. Is your audio doubled?
Oh, I don't know. Try it, Brandon.
Hello?
Okay. I don't know what I'm hearing. That might be me. Well, it sounds good to everybody else, but check out the discourse, and we're waiting on Matt Binder. We'll see him soon, but check out Left Reckoning and check out Left Reckoning 2, Scam Economy, and Leftist Mafia, and Doomed. All right, guys, we will head into the fun half. 646-257-3920. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the majority report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset?
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and...
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour? I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour? I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour?
I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job. Tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Boss. Willy Wonka tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing.
Real thing. What's that offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's
a tour?
A real thing. That's real thing.
Real thing. Boss. That offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
Real thing.
That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, Greg.
Tour? Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour?
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. Happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks are doing great.
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best.
Violet tour?
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't binge. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
sorry.
She wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
We are back. We do have Matt Binder, but he will be with us in just a second. Turning off the voicemail. 646-257-3920. DSA Aaron from Atlanta. The Michael Brooks at the end is amazing. Yes, that was a great touch. Daniel Panic says...
Is that all from one appearance of yours?
I don't know. I mean, the song is such a banger. It's very Tim Pool centric. So I guess that was a seismic moment in...
Well, that's the thing is
people's understanding of me.
There's also the video. The previous Fun Half song was Sam's Crowder moment. It kind of seems like that's what happens. Is like we have a sort of, and then as a capstone, do a song about it.
I guess I just got to do more debates. Between the 1 and 1 and the 5, says the theme song has clearly used some kind of effects on Tim Pool's voice. Oh, there he is, Matt Binder. Hello, Matt. And you're muted. God damn
muted
it.
Binder.
Oh, that's my fault because I muted myself when I went to get my soda. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. What soda did you get?
Oh, just Coke.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola in a
glass?
In a Chuck E. Cheese cup.
Nice.
That's how you know you have kids.
Yes, or I just go to Chuck E. Cheese myself. But I have kids, right?
Don't tell people that. Don't tell people that.
It's an arcade. No, I take my kids. I don't go to Chuck E. Cheese by myself.
But
I've protest too much.
Yeah, right. What's happening on Doomed and Scam Economy?
We had a good stream this past just last night. God, time is just I don't even know anymore.
I know.
It was a long stream. I went over 4 hours somehow, talking about various topics. I had someone from the organization Progressive Victory on as well because I'll be headed to the. They're having an event next weekend to help knock on doors and canvass for Jamal Bowman, and I'll be taking part in that. I wanted to, talk with them about some issues that my audience might have heard about their organization and to lay it out open for everybody. So I had them on and looking forward to knocking on doors for Jamal Bowman. People should come out.
That's a good way to transition, I guess. Matt, you put this clip in the samples, right? The long radio interview.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was you, Bradley? Oh, okay.
All right. I didn't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Scratch that. This is a little long, but I'm taking Bradley's word for it that it's worth it. It's a call into Brian Lehrer's WNYC radio show. And George Latimer called, I guess a caller is...
Yeah, George Latimer is on with Brian Lehrer, and usually on Lehrer's show he has constituents call in. So
I don't know anything about this guy. Is he a right winger?
No, Brian Lehrer is just like a long-time WNYC public radio host.
Gotcha.
So people will call in. This woman who calls in, she says that she's a constituent in the district in New York 16th, and she's a black woman.
Okay.
She contextualizes that before she gets into why she's skeptical about supporting
George Latimer. And I'm curious to see how he responds here. Here we go.
Okay. But I find it interesting that you talk about things like, pro-choice when you take money from AIPAC, that comes for women and women's rights, but that's a side comment. My core comment is, as a black person in the district, I find it impossible for you to be able to adequately represent my interests and the interests of other people of color for a multitude of reasons. And let me go into one of them that I find really problematic. When Andrew Cuomo was facing his reckoning for sexually harassing women, and you came to his defense, you had the audacity to compare what Cuomo was experiencing to the lynching of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old child who was mutilated, murdered, and lynched. And I find it completely offensive that you would make that comparison on top of a bunch of other things that you do. I'd like for you to respond to that. And with that response, what I don't want you to do is to engage in tokenization, because every time you're asked about race, you then start going into a litany of a, quote, I have black friends response. You know who also has black friends? Donald Trump. And proximity to blackness is not a shield from racism. And so I think you're a racist, and I think that the way that you engage with people of color in your district that ask you hard questions, you respond by being very aggressive with them, very combative with them, and you marginalize them as you go into your response. So I want you to respond to how you could adequately represent somebody like me when I think the way that you come for me and people like me actually attacks and endangers people of color in your district and this country.
Thank you for your question, County Executive.
Wait,
Latimer.
can we pause it?
Tough
Can we
question.
pause it? Can we pause it for a second? I just gotta.
Well done.
I mean, wow, that was
making New Yorkers proud.
Force.
Yeah,
Oh
she was
my
prepared.
God.
She should have started with the first long time, first time.
Yeah. She should have started that with it like that. It's someone's computer is playing, and that's why I hear Brandon twice. I think. Okay, I'm sorry if I'm obsessive about this audio. But yeah, no, it's that was really amazing. Can we pull up his actual quote here that I sent in the chat about Emmett Till, just so people know exactly what Latimer said at the time? This is from an old Facebook post from March 18th, 2021. Latimer said at the time, here we go. In a time of irrational anger and emotion, let me try to take a serious take on a serious issue, the charges against Andrew Cuomo. These are serious charges that assert unacceptable behavior. No man can truly appreciate what a woman goes through in moments like this. But two, in our world, no matter how heinous the crime committed, we presume innocence until guilt is proven. That standard, when we adhere to it, protects you and me. And when it is not adhered to, when a mob acts in its own sense of justice, it turns out to be a crime itself. That's one part. And then he says here at the bottom. That was the retraction? Okay. This is what...
Here's the original version. In our world, no matter how heinous the crime committed, we presume innocence until guilt is proven. That standard, when we adhere to it, protects you and me. And when it is not adhered to, when a mom hangs Emmett Till, the justice turns out to be a crime itself.
All right. Well, that's pretty amazing. Ooh. So that's what she's referencing here. And let's hear how Bowman's challenger, Latimer, responds.
Well, clearly, I can't satisfy the caller because she's made up her mind. What I can tell you is that the Mount Vernon Democratic Committee, which is 85% African American, endorsed me unanimously for this position.
He just did it. He just did the things we told him not to do.
Of African American county legislators, African American elected officials throughout the county. I have the support of unions like CSEA and TWU Local 100, which are multicultural, both African American and Latino individuals. They're not offended by my policies. I think the caller has a point of view which is shared by some people, but I do not believe it's shared universally. I have the support from some members of the black clergy who understand who I am as a person. They don't judge me by a tweet, and they don't judge me with a predetermined notion that somehow because I am white, I can't possibly represent somebody who is not white. You can only be in one demographic, and if the philosophy of where we are heading is that you cannot be in office unless you have my identity, then we're in a bad place.
In fairness, the caller did not say that, right? In fairness, the caller did not say that, right?
No, but what I'm saying is I'm responding to a question in my terms. She was, I think, pretty clear that she's not happy with me and that I can't represent her interests. That's what she said. And so what I'm saying is, if we are at the point where because I am not of the same demographic as she is, I can't represent her interests, then I don't know where you go with that.
Pause
I
it real
think
quick.
realistically,
She said your rhetoric about specific things, and including like also your supporters, like it's not because you're a white guy.
Yeah, I good job to Brian Lehrer there. I wasn't familiar with him before, but he did a great job.
I will say that he forgot to mention the support that he gets from one of the most important pillars of the black community, Hillary Clinton.
Yes,
true,
right.
yeah.
She did endorse Latimer, and she had previously endorsed the incumbent when Bowman was challenging him in 2020, Elliot Engel. We saw how well that worked out for Elliot Engel, so I'm hoping the same thing happens here.
as she is, I can't represent her interests, then I don't know where you go with that. I think realistically,
Not what she said.
we are only the demographic we are. And then in theory, you only vote for the person who looks exactly like you. That might get you Clarence Thomas. I don't know. But whatever it is,
racism.
Brian,
That's what this is.
whatever it is, I'm responding to her question on my terms. Once again, I'm trying to articulate what I think. And I understand she wants me to comment within her framework, which clearly is a framework that doesn't support me.
The Cuomo Emmett Till thing that she refers to, I think I have the text in front of me. You wrote, I think, on Facebook, in our world, no matter how heinous the crime.
I deleted it, Brian. I put it on Facebook. I was angry at the time. I deleted it within half an hour. I thought better of it. It was a foolish tweet. I have said so, and I deleted it at the time. It is not reflective of the broader way that I deal with circumstances like this. But I recognize it was a foolish set of words. It was hurtful to some people, and I deleted it. Now, having deleted it within a half an hour of my posting it, people want to define my whole career based on that. And when I say that I grew up where I did, that is the environment I grew up in. I am not trying to establish anything other than a framework for my life. And when my opponent talks about he grew up in public housing, I grew up in the situation as well, and that's all I'm trying to reference.
So you deleted it a half hour later. She raised it, people deserve to know what it was. The quote was, in our world, no matter how heinous the crime committed, we presume innocence until guilt is proven. That standard, when we adhere to it, protects you and me. And when it is not adhered to, when a mob hangs Emmett Till, the quote, justice turns out to be a crime itself. That was in the context of defending Andrew Cuomo. So I guess people would question, that was your impulse.
Good
Brian,
job.
would you also qualify that tweet occurred long before the final report came out on Andrew Cuomo's guilt or
doesn't
innocence?
matter.
At the time, people were calling on him to resign on the basis of the accusations. And what I said at the time was, you need to have the full report come out. I trusted Tish James to do a thorough job. She did. She came out with a report. When the report came out, I did call
Okay, it's not Emmett Till.
At that point in time, what I considered to be a rush to judgment that was unfair, because you cannot
All right,
take
can you
an
pause it for a sec? The rush to judgment in Emmett Till's instance was what resulted in a lynching and extrajudicial killing of a little boy based on the claims of a white woman who said that Emmett Till basically harassed her, went after her, attacked her. Though the context of that was that it was in an incredibly racist time, and the result was a racist killing of a little boy.
Yeah, in a lynching culture.
Versus a powerful man who, in the context of like a reckoning on sexual abuse within the workplace and using power dynamics to get for powerful men to get ahead and do what they want sexually, these women came out and made those accusations. Would you say the context is a little bit different?
It's a little different, although
it's not only obviously the main thing here is comparing Andrew Cuomo to Emmett Till, but it's also extraordinarily demeaning to the women that came out who were abused by Andrew Cuomo, literally calling them equating them to this woman who lied basically in order to see that community carry out this racist lynching of this young black kid.
Right, Bender. It's literally to your point. It's not only comparing Cuomo to Emmett Till. It's comparing Cuomo's accusers to that of a lynch mob.
Yes,
right. That of the people looking to, as you said, Emma, extrajudicially attack and brutally murder someone because of a false allegation in a racially animated hate crime. And it's also just rich that this racist prick literally gets asked by a black woman to respond to that, and please do not tokenize my entire racial group, and also not grind your teeth into dust in anger because you're getting questioned by a black woman. And he just responds by talking about all of his black friends and black interest group support while grinding his teeth into dust in anger because a black woman questioned him.
Yeah, it's amazing.
He also kind of blames anti-white racism on it. Like he blames it on anti-white. He's just like, she won't vote for me because she won't vote for me because I'm white, which also, I don't want to do identity politics, but it is weird to me as a black person that his impulse when he's heated, the first impulse of this white politician when he's heated is to compare things to Emmett Till.
Yeah.
As a black person from the South, I don't do that. So it just makes it seem as though, I don't know, he was reaching for a way to self-victimize.
Right.
When it's not self-victimize, make a victim out of Andrew Cuomo.
It's also, so, I mean, this was from the, when last week, Jamal Bowman's challenger, there we go, Latimer, was endorsed by Mondaire Jones, who once fashioned himself as a progressive, but has now kind of folded himself into the Democratic establishment and a pro-Israel stance in his race. So when Mondaire Jones endorsed Latimer over, when Mondaire Jones endorsed, yes, I said that right. Mondaire Jones endorsed Latimer over Jamal Bowman. The quote was that he was not a racist. Oh, shoot, I just lost it there, because he had support from someone in the black community.
From a Zionist plant.
Right. So that is really how he sees everybody. It's just like, oh, good. If you're not supporting me, caller, you've made a predetermination based on my race. But for black people who are voting for me, well, that's proof that I don't have a problem appealing to other people because of their race.
And
I also want to really quickly. I want to also mention, like, he chalked it up in his defense of that post, comparing Andrew Cuomo to Emmett Till. He chalked it up to, it was a moment of, I was upset, it was heated. But if you look at the post, it's literally him saying, he starts it out with, in a time of irrational anger and emotion, let me try to take a serious take on a serious issue. He's literally saying everyone else is in a moment of heated rhetoric and not thinking clearly. Yet I, the very serious individual, I have thought this through. I have laid it out here for you. Like his excuse for what he wrote is bullshit. He sat down very clearly and took the time to write this. He was clear-headed, clear-minded. This is just who he is.
Yeah. We have this quote here I was referring to. The argument about me running a racist campaign falls flat on its face when people who are African American, Latino, and Asian are supporting me, he said in an interview. That is not how
the
that
argument
works.
about me running a racist campaign falls flat on its face when people who are African American, Latino, and Asian are supporting me.
It also goes counter to what he said to that caller when he said, like, if you're only, this was also very racist, but it also goes counter to that point of view. He said, oh, if you're only going to vote for someone who looks like you, then I guess you're going to go get yourself a Clarence Thomas. Right. He said that in the call. Well, guess what? Clarence Thomas, like, he's only viewing Clarence Thomas in that light, but he's not viewing it in the other situation where, there are black conservatives who support white supremacist Republicans and conservatives. Like, yeah, you do have supporters who are black. That does not mean that they automatically are representative of the entire black Democratic electorate.
So, yeah, he should be asked, is Donald Trump a racist because he appointed Ben Carson to be this head of housing and urban development? He has a black friend.
I also think... Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, I just think that the Democrats feel as though they own political blackness. And I don't mean that in the way like Candace Owens is always like, Democrats have black people on the plantation. I just mean it in terms of like what they feel as though they are the party that is capable of weaponizing and mobilizing the idea of